Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to our students and everyone in the virtual audience. It gives me great pleasure as the director of the Serata Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies on the St. Augustine campus to welcome each and every one of you to this very special event, which we are hosting to commemorate the birthday of Serata Lewis, Nobel Laureate in Economics, 1979. We at the Institute, on an annual basis, host a series of events commemorating the birthday of Serata Lewis on the last week of January. And our campus colleagues, our university colleagues on the Mona and Cave Hill campuses also participate and host events similar to the one we are hosting today. Normally, when we host these events, we have feature speakers, and these feature speakers are notably academics and scholars who speak and have specialized in the area of the work that Serata Lewis has done on a scholarly basis. Today, we have taken a departure from that tradition, and we have decided that in the true interest of development studies, that we will target the next generation of development studies specialists and scholars. And it is with that in mind that we decided we will reach the schools and encourage the schools to think about the life and work and legacy of Serata Lewis. So it is with that in mind that we targeted sixth formers in particular and developed the idea of a sixth formers webinar sponsored by SALISES. We had to move quickly, and we were able to attract 7 schools in Trinidad, in Tobago, and in St. Lucia to participate in our event. This is a very important event for several reasons, because what we are actually doing is encouraging our young persons who, and many of them have very well-polished minds already in terms of their capacity to think and analyze complex situations. We want to showcase that. We want to encourage them to demonstrate their capacity to engage in such a process. And we think these well-polished minds are the minds that will continue throughout their lifetime to embellish and illuminate our universe with respect to matters pertaining to development studies, given their trajectory at this particular point in time in their lives. We are particularly proud of the legacy of Serata Lewis. And like Karl Marx, Thomas Malthus, and all of the other landmark scholars who are central to the studies of these CAPES level students, we think our Serata Lewis is equal in that regard and should be studied and revered in much the same way as we study Karl Marx, Thomas Malthus, David Ricardo, among others. So just as you have in today's world, neo-Marxism, neo-Malthusian ideologies and perspectives, we also feel that in engaging our young people in the way we are doing today, that we can actually be developing a school of thought that will champion the notion of neo-Lewisian thought. What is important about today's proceedings, I would think, is that these presenters are the ones who in the 2030s, 2040s, 2050s, and even into the 2060s, more than 100 years after Lewis would have made his pronouncements and declared his scholarship, these are the actors who will be charting our development trajectories, notwithstanding the challenges they may encounter. And it is very important, I think, for them to at least be aware of the historical antecedents as they relate to development studies in Caribbean societies. What these antecedents have achieved, what they did not achieve, why they achieved what they achieved, and why they did not achieve what they did not achieve. And what perhaps are new remedies, novel remedies that can be pursued in keeping with the New World Order as it emerges. And the New World Order is more theirs than ours, because they are the ones who are going to be living that New World Order. And I think this is in the true essence of development studies and the interdisciplinary character of the work that Serata Lewis did. And we encourage our young students, those who will present, those who will witness the presentations today, to come to terms with this interdisciplinary character and demonstrate this interdisciplinary character in their presentations. I have seen a few of the presentations, and what I have seen looks really good already. I think they have done their schools and they have done their country and their region proud. Kudos to those who have risen to the challenge and have come forth along with their teachers and mentors and principals and school administrators. We salute all of you. To complete today's proceedings, we do have 4 commentators, each with an interest in the work of Serata Lewis, each being a development specialist in his or her own right. And each of these commentators will complete today's proceedings by commenting, expressing their views on the impact of Serata Lewis's scholarship on their tenure as academics, as professionals. And they too would respond in many ways to some of the ideas that you would have expressed as young charges responsible for delivering your thoughts in this webinar. We are pleased to have all of you. And at this point, I'm particularly pleased to acknowledge the presence of the Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences in the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus, Dr. Akula Lewis Cameron, and also the University Director of Serata Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies, Professor Aldry Henry Lee, who is based on the Mona campus of the university. We also want to salute and acknowledge all other distinguished persons who are part of today's celebration and presentations. And we look forward to a really splendid occasion that would be etched in the memories of those who have participated, albeit positive memories. So I thank you for your presence. I appreciate your presence. We appreciate your presence here in SALISES. We welcome you to the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, and do enjoy today's proceedings. Thank you very much. So as we proceed, I would like to invite Dr. Akula Lewis Cameron, who is the Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of the West Indies in St. Augustine. She will bring greetings from the faculty of Social Sciences, of which SALISES, the Serata Lewis Institute, is a part. So I now invite Dr. Lewis Cameron to bring greetings. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. St. Bernard. And let me join you in welcoming each and every one of you to this special occasion. A special welcome to Professor Henry Lee and other colleagues from UWI. And of course, this event would not have been possible were it not for the presence and participation of the students across the various secondary schools. And so I want to begin, first of all, to thank you for taking up this challenge and for the quality of work that we have seen you put into this initiative. And so I bring greetings on behalf of the Faculty of Social Sciences as we commemorate the life and the scholarly work of Sir Arthur Lewis. There is, I would say, immense value in remembering and reflecting on the contributions of those who have gone before us and who have made significant contributions to our progress as a region. So Winston Churchill said, "The further backward you can look, the further forward you are likely to see." And today, as we consider the past contributions of Sir Arthur Lewis, let us take courage in these challenging times that we too, like Sir Lewis, can navigate the socioeconomic challenges of our time with grace and fortitude to leave an indelible mark on those who will come after us. I have to compliment and commend SALISES for the approach taken this year to engage our region's youth, to present on topics associated with the seminal studies of Sir Arthur Lewis. For almost 2 years, all of us, we've endured drastic changes to our learning and development while being apart from peers and even family members. I trust that as you prepared your presentations, that you were encouraged by the journey of a man who originated from a dot on the map, which so many times they refer to the Caribbean islands as, and who developed academic prowess that allowed him to grace institutions such as Princeton University with his presence. He was able to achieve much at a tender age, despite his many challenges. One of the greatest challenges would have been losing his father at an early age, which for any young person usually has devastating effects. Additionally, as he ventured abroad to develop himself, he was able to push past the stigmas of the day attributed to his nationality and race and achieve world-renowned accolades. You may or may not have the same challenges today, but whatever your challenges are, accomplishments rivaling the likes of Sir Arthur Lewis are still very possible for you to attain. I trust that your research fostered a passion for self-development and inspired the same love for Sir Arthur Lewis, Sir Arthur Lewis had for Caribbean development and progress. We need our young people to be the beacon of light for this beloved region as we continue to recover and build resilience. This morning, I look forward to hearing all the presentations and I trust that we can all glean critical lessons that would assist us in our various academic and professional spheres. Thank you and do enjoy today's proceedings. Dr. St. Bernard.
Yes, thank you very much, Dean Dr. Apula Lewis Cameron, for your kind remarks and greetings and informing the children, the young people, about the importance of Sir Arthur Lewis's scholarship. I now want to move swiftly on to our University Director of SALISES, She is Professor Aldry Henry Lee, who is based on the Mona campus, and she brings greetings on behalf of SALISES Regional. I now invite Professor Henry Lee to bring her greetings to you. Professor Henry Lee.
Yeah, Dr. Akula Lewis Cameron, Dean, Faculty of Social Sciences, St. Augustine Campus, UWI. Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard, Acting Director, Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies, St. Augustine Campus, UWI. Presenters, especially students, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Sir Arthur Lewis's birthday is celebrated on January 23rd. For the younger members of the audience, just a few facts about Lewis. He was the first West Indian principal of the University College of the West Indies. He was the first West Indian Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies. He was the first Black professor, Princeton College, an Ivy League college, mind you. In 1979, Sir Arthur Lewis was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics. He was the first person of African origin to receive a Nobel Prize in the field other than peace. His theory of economic development and unlimited supplies of labor remain very relevant to this day. The Sir Arthur Lewis Community College in St. Lucia, the Sir Arthur Lewis Building in Manchester, and the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies at the UWI are named after him. Every year, we at the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies are always pleased to celebrate his lasting legacy during the month of January. Arthur Lewis did not only focus on economics, and as a sociologist, I like to point that out. He understood the importance of the social aspect of development. For example, Arthur Lewis, in his publication, Labor in the West Indies, he spoke about social conditions. He noted the dilapidated housing, the undernourished conditions of the masses and their children. He lamented the absence of social legislation concerning housing or working conditions, and he noted the lack of schools. He placed great emphasis on the role of education for the attainment of sustainable development. Patrick Emanuel in 1994, quoting Leonard Silk of the New York Times, stated that one of Lewis's values was to bring the humanity to the center of the attention of fellow economists and to bring the skills of the economists to bear on the problems of poverty that still afflict most of the human race. I want to congratulate Dr. St. Bernard for this excellent initiative to involve children in the examination of Arthur Lewis's legacy. As a research institute, we must be involved in building the capacity of the younger generation. This event today is an excellent example of how we can ensure that Sir Arthur Lewis's legacy lives on. This initiative enhances our own research at SALISES about children and with children. And I want to use this opportunity to highlight our annual Caribbean Child Research Conference, which is the only regional conference where adult and student and usually children researchers are given equal voice. Every year in November during the conference, we listen to the children throughout the Caribbean region as they discuss issues that affect them. They also put forward recommendations for the improvement in their lives. I hope to see many of today's student presenters at this year's conference in November. Article 12 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the CRC, establishes the right of every child to freely express his or her views. We have held so many seminars for adult researchers to examine Sir Arthur Lewis's legacy. In fact, we have a fairly recent publication of our journal, a special issue published by SALISES, and the journal is named Social and Economic Studies. And in volumes 68, numbers 1 and 2, 2019, we dedicate the entire issue to Sir Arthur Lewis. And the issue, just a little PR moment, is available online at www.mona.uwi.edu/SES, www.mona.edu.ue.edu/SES. This is my PR moment. I have to sell our journal. So now is the time to hear what the children our students have to say about Sir Arthur Lewis. I look forward to listening to the students. I commend all of them for taking the time out to write on Sir Arthur Lewis. I am sure it was a rewarding experience, and hopefully, Dr. St. Bernard, we can have a publication, even an online one, of all these presentations by the students. All the very best for a successful event, and congratulations to all student presenters. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Henry Lee, for bringing your greetings on behalf of SALISES Regional and for sharing the virtues of the legacy of Sir Arthur Lewis and the importance of the Institute in extending and disseminating the value of such a legacy. So thank you very much. And we will move straight into the presentations by the sixth formers. We are happy that 7 schools made the decision that they will participate in today's proceedings. Based on initial checks, I'm not sure that all 7 are with us, but we will stick to the program in terms of the schools in the order in which they will present. Of course, we gave the school several topics to choose from, several themes that were relevant in the work of Sir Arthur Lewis: regionalism, development planning, industrialization in the Caribbean, industrialization and unlimited supplies of labor, dual economies, regionalism, a whole range of other development issues around education, race and class, and of course, the whole question of employment and unemployment were critical dimensions of his scholarship. The schools and the school teams in particular were encouraged to select one of these themes. And I am very pleased to say that many of them, from what I have seen and the enthusiasm they have displayed, many of them did rise to the clarion call and have delivered in superlative terms. So at this point, I would like to introduce the first school that will deliver its presentation. Some of these schools have several presenters. Some schools have just one presenter. So I presume as the school comes forth, the presenter can quickly announce the presenters who will actually be presenting and begin the presentation. Each school has approximately 10 minutes to complete its presentation. And I want at this point to invite the first school, Bishop Anstey High School, Port of Spain, to begin its presentation. Bishop Anstey, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Today we assemble to celebrate the legacy of Sir Arthur Lewis and his works. Traditionally, persons tend to focus on his economic contributions. However, my group and I, Renelle Fleming, Chelsea Felician, and myself, Faith Flavius, saw it pertinent to shed light on the rise of Lewis's ideas on regionalism as a strategy for Caribbean development, along with its continued importance. Thank you.
We will now begin the presentation. This is the theme of regionalism in the life and work of Sir Arthur Lewis. Beginning with the background of Sir Arthur Lewis, he was born in St. Lucia to parents who migrated from Antigua. He fell ill at the age of 7 and was homeschooled by his father until he later attended St. Mary's College. He graduated at the early age of 14. However, he had to delay his schooling until 1932, where he won the singular most competitive scholarship on the island at age 18. Later, from 1933 to 1937, he attended the London School of Economics, pursuing his Bachelor of Commerce degree. Next slide. Some of Lewis's major accomplishments include becoming the first in several different areas of his life. He also won the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences, where he became known as one of the first Black men to win a Nobel Prize outside of the fields of peace and literature. He was also knighted by Her Majesty the Queen of England for his contributions to the Commonwealth. Next slide, please. Below are some of Arthur Lewis's well-known publications. Lewis's most significant works were concerned with stimulating economic growth in the West Indies, and he became quite renowned for his model of economic growth based on industrialization, first proposed in his paper Industrialization of the British West Indies in 1950. Next slide. What is Caribbean regionalism? In the work of Lewis, regionalism is a way to coordinate and manage the development of the region with the idea that countries within the region can benefit from collective resources and development. There is no doubt that Sir Arthur Lewis's own personal experiences played a tremendous role in shaping his exceedingly positive attitude towards regionalism, beginning with Lewis's family life. Seeing that he is a St. Lucian with Antiguan parents, it brought about his pan-Caribbean identity, having been born and raised within the region. His Caribbean identity further developed after his diaspora experience in England and the United States, as this is where Lewis was first faced with issues such as racism and discrimination, which led him to seek solace from metropolitan Caribbean communities who shared similar experiences with him. While in London, Lewis was also influenced by early radical social circles. Lewis's social circles in London consisted of radical Pan-African and anti-colonial thinkers. He became well acquainted with intellectuals and activists such as Sir Eric Williams and George Padmore. They were all of the view that colonialism produced common problems throughout the developing world. This common experience called for the coming together of the colonized in order to forge the way forward. Lastly, social work in West Indian communities. This is where Lewis was very involved in the well-being of West Indians in England, as they had been experiencing difficulty. He invested a significant amount of his energy and time to create these centers that would provide them with education and opportunity. These experiences of camaraderie and social support molded Lewis into an intellect and activist who was determined to assist his fellow West Indians in escaping poverty, whether it be in England or back home in the West Indies.
While Lewis's personal life shaped his positive attitude towards regionalism, it is safe to say that he is indeed a man of his time, pun intended, as much of his work was greatly influenced by Caribbean events that happened during his lifetime. This includes the labor riots in the 1930s that were as a result of the poor socioeconomic conditions due to laggard human and economic development in the region. However, while this was happening, leaders of the region were also looking for a development strategy or model in order to move away from their dependency on their European counterparts. This was in hopes of making progress towards decolonization, but also movements towards political and economic independence and development. For Lewis, the answer was simple for this development: Caribbean integration or regionalism. As such, Lewis made several attempts in order to achieve Caribbean regionalism. His main focus was the formation of the West Indian Federation in 1958, as he was one of the coordinators. Additionally, he was also the principal of the University College of the West Indies, and later the Vice Chancellor at the University of the West Indies in 1962. This was the foundation for higher education in the region. Furthermore, he was also the founding president of the Caribbean Development Bank, which was the first formal attempt at financial and institutional cooperation in the region. However, there were several challenges that led to the failure of Lewis's main focus, the West Indian Federation. Firstly, there was unwillingness from regional leaders. Many of the different countries could not agree on a common federal revenue to contribute to the Federation. Additionally, there were issues, particularly with Trinidad and Tobago, with free movement. Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago also could not agree on where the headquarters would be located. Furthermore, there was also the unequal distribution of power. Differences in size, population, and level of natural resources contributed to many disputes. As noted by Beckles and Shepard in their book Freedoms 1, 7/8 of the Federation's population was made up by Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica. As such, the smaller islands feared the twin giants, and the twin giants feared having to carry the weight of the smaller islands. This sentiment was popularly shared, particularly in Jamaica, where the opposition leader Alexander Bustamante convinced the population that they would have to carry the weight of the smaller islands. As such, the Jamaican population voted to no longer participate in the Federation, and their leader, Michael Manley, held a referendum and left the Federation. This led to Eric Williams' famous saying, 1 from 10 leaves 0, as he predicted that Jamaica leaving the Federation would lead to the catalyst of the failure of the West Indian Federation. Subsequently, Trinidad left, leaving 8 in agony and the dismantlement of the West Indian Federation.
Lewis's attempt at the West Indian Federation was not a success, but there have been some more recent and successful attempts at Caribbean regionalism, such as the West Indian Cricket Team, the University of the West Indies, the Caribbean Community and Common Market, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, and the CARICOM Single Market Economy. Next slide, please. All of these organizations share one thing in common. They stem from the unionism of various Caribbean countries for the betterment of the wider Caribbean, whether it be through education, sport, and many other purposes. This coming together of Caribbean countries was a vision sought after by Serata Lewis. Even though his dream of the West Indian Federation did not happen, he was able to plant a seed that we are fortunate enough to see the fruits of today. We see this through the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, the Caribbean Public Health Agency, the Caribbean Meteorological Organization, the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, and the Caribbean Examinations Council. In addition to the many successes, next slide, please. In addition to the many successes, there continues to be challenges associated with the idea of regionalism from the time of Lewis, even to today, even though some Caribbean leaders have certainly become more positive to the idea of regionalism. These challenges include the free movement, dominance, and economic performance. CMSE allows for the movement of Caribbean persons from one island to another with limited restrictions. There is the fear that there would be a mass movement of people into developed countries from developing countries, and that this would put a strain on said countries' resources. There is also the fears that certain countries would dominate others in terms of voting, for example, due to the size of the population, and the fact that some Caribbean countries are more economically stable than others and would automatically hold more power because of this while making certain decisions. Next slide, please. Regardless of these fears, however, regionalism continues to be a useful and important factor able to solve many current issues facing the Caribbean today. The current international, political, and economic context has meant that Caribbean countries face a wide range of difficulties. These include the effects of natural disasters to a shortage of resources, complex access to financing, narrow fiscal space for introducing social reforms, and the burden of high levels of indebtedness. Regionalism has played a vital part in alleviating the impacts of some of these issues on the Caribbean population. The effects of the natural disasters or climate change is a major example of how regionalism can be used to solve these issues. Next slide, please. Benefits that the CARICOM provided is a major example of how regionalism can be helped to improve climate change. The CARICOM provided disaster displaced persons with a right of entry in other islands, supported the waiver of travel documentation requirements where documents had been lost or damaged in natural disasters, granted indefinite stays to some disaster displaced persons, facilitating permanent resettlement, and ease access to foreign labor markets through a mutual recognition of skills scheme and or a waiver of work permit requirements so that these persons could find employment.
Final remarks. Although Sir Arthur Lewis was not the inventor of the concept of regionalism, he was one of the few who saw the value in promoting regionalism at a time where it was not widely accepted. Therefore, it is necessary to commend Lewis on his foresight and his vision. Many years later, it is evident that regionalism remains an important theme that continually plays an important role in the development of the Caribbean. Last slide, please. That being said, thank you for granting us this opportunity to share some insights into Arthur Lewis's life and work in relation to the theme of regionalism. Thank you for listening to the presentation, and this is the end.
Okay, thank you very much to the team from Bishop Anstey High School in Port of Spain. And I want to commend the three of you and your teacher who supervised this profound presentation which you just delivered. I think we can really say that, our students and our region are in good hands. Our people are in good hands with young people such as yourselves coming to the fore and assuming professional responsibilities based on the quality of the presentation you just delivered. So a special thanks to all of you, your entire team, your school, for permitting you to deliver in today's webinar. I want to move on, and I'm sure that the members of the audience can send their applauses to the team for their work. I want to move on to the second school team, and that is the school team of Trinity College in Mocha Maraval. That team is going to be presenting on other development issues. Again, the team has 10 minutes, and whoever begins the presentation can announce the names of the team members and who is actually going to present. So I now invite Trinity College, Mocha Maraval, to make its presentation.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Trinity College Mocha, I, Zane Adams, Josiah Farrell, and Vanessa Williams will be presenting on development issues. Trying to share my screen. Sorry, the computer is on. Can you all hear me? Hello, good morning.
Yes, I'm hearing you. We are hearing you clearly, yes.
All right, great. Is this how you do it? All right. Sorry, the computer is just giving a bit of trouble, but attempting to share the screen right now. Leave. Right. Okay. Where do you go? Yeah. Right. Okay. Good. So we are presenting issues in development, and I will be starting off with crime. So to begin, in terms of crime, we have seen an increase in crime since the 1990s. And obviously this has a significant drawback to the development of the country. One of the main factors that can be addressed in attempting to deal with the steady increase in crime is the way our country has attempted to deal with this epidemic. Crime suppression was the primary response to crime in Trinidad and Tobago in the past, which only superficially fixes the issue, but never actually deals with the root cause of it. Crime prevention is now recognized as an indispensable component of any meaningful approach to dealing with crime, but there is still a long way to go before any significant integration is applied. More legislation supporting preventative measures need to be applied for real change to occur, rather than the law that has been developed or is in the process of being developed in an oppressive nature, focusing on increasing fines and criminalizing a broader range of behaviors. Right? Right now, I will be transferring the camera to Vanessa Williams, sorry, to discuss education in terms of development issues. Okay.
Hi, good morning. I will be discussing education. There are a number of issues facing education in our country which negatively affect development. For starters, the way the education system is structured in terms of curriculum and syllabus, there seems to be a tendency to produce consumers rather than producers. This could stem from the encouragement of regurgitation and mindless assignments in place of free thought and autonomy in said education system. Naturally, this form of education, while it works for some, is completely irrelevant to many, hence failing a significant portion of the student population. As the society progresses, there seems to be a streamlining of the education system towards the sciences and away from the traditional vocational education. This leaves many students with no career choice unless they succeed in traditional academic circles. While unions do serve an essential role in society, there is often a never-ending conflict between the unions and the ministry. While positive outcomes do sometimes come from these disputes, there are also a number of these events where the student education is compromised. Education plays a quintessential role in the development of society. Major changes in the system need to be made in order to enact real change. Next, we have Josiah Farrell.
Good morning, everyone. I will be presenting on underdeveloped economy and dependence on oil prices. The economy of Trinidad and Tobago is substantially dependent on natural resources and the overall performance of the energy sector. energy sector is charged with the sale and production of oil, natural gas, and petrochemicals. In order for a country such as Trinidad and Tobago to rely on such a resource, it must be economically capable of supporting that state. Oil and gas prices are solely determined by global supply and demand. The larger an economy is, the higher the demand for energy exists. For example, the United States require vast amounts of energy in order to support massive sectors such as transportation. Therefore, their demand for energy is high. Although the global energy market tends to fluctuate, it is necessary for Trinidad and Tobago to rely on oil and gas prices in order to sustain its economy and meet budgetary projections for the future. The finances of the government have been reduced due to a collapse in oil prices. The oil prices plummeted from 150 US to US $30 a barrel. While oil prices plummeted and revenues reduced, the expenditure of the government has remained the same. If a country is spending more than it's earning, it creates a situation where budgetary deficits are met, as seen over the last 6 years. This is due to the country's heavy reliance on high oil prices and the uncertainty of these prices, and the country's incapability of having a diverse enough economy which can possibly cushion the effects of unexpected prices. The reality is that global energy prices may never rise again to what they once were. The energy outlook is that global energy prices may continue to remain stable, or these prices may decrease. Based on the uncertain nature of energy price projections for the next 5 years, the government has sought out other avenues in an effort to mitigate budget deficits. While a country's financial situation country's financial situation is unstable and a country is heavily in debt, such as Trinidad and Tobago, it hinders any measurable development from taking place in this country. While we meet deficits, budget deficits, and these finances are absent, the oil prices create the low oil prices, and our dependence on these low oil prices create a situation where we are unable to, our financial allocations in sectors such as health, education, and national security are reduced, and state-owned entities and state-assisted entities receive less finances every year. Based on the work of Sir Arthur Lewis, we can argue that Trinidad and Tobago is still an underdeveloped economy, and the country's continued reliance on one commodity poses a significant threat to the future of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you.
All right, thanks for that, Josiah. We will now be ending on a quote from Sir Arthur Lewis that we think encapsulates the message that we are trying to share. He said, when the developed grow fast, the developing grow fast. And when the developed slow down, the developing slow down. The subsistence level is only a conventional idea, and conventions change. Sir Arthur Lewis. All right, so we want to thank you for allowing us to present and allowing us to participate in this presentation. Thank you on behalf of Trinity College.
Well, well, well. Another superb presentation, and my heartiest thanks to both Trinity College, Mocha Maraval, and Bishop Anstey High School in Port of Spain. Those two presentations remind me of the glory days of West Indies cricket, when we had the opening pair of Gordon Greenwich and Desmond Haynes. Wonderful work, both schools. And with respect to the last presentation on other development issues, I quite appreciate the importance of the economics and how the economics dovetails with development planning that has implications for some of the multi-sectoral issues and performance in those issues, and tying it back to the multidisciplinary perspective, the interdisciplinary perspectives of Serata Lewis. So having said that, I want to move swiftly into our third school team, which hails from the beautiful island of Tobago. And we have Bishop's High School in Tobago that will begin this third presentation. Again, each team has 10 minutes. The first speaker can announce the names of the team members and who will be presenting. And I now invite Bishop's High School in Tobago to begin its presentation. Bishop's High School Tobago, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, greetings to one and all. My name is Kyle Pierre, with me is Maya Tony, and my next group member is AJ Gordon. And we'll be presenting the development planning on Sir Arthur Lewis. Firstly, we have our table of contents. So what we'll be discussing today in our presentation. First, we'll be discussing who is Sir William Arthur Lewis, definition of development planning, highlighting key points of Sir Lewis' contribution to development planning, and our conclusion. Firstly, who is Sir Arthur Lewis? And the first thing we want to state is we are in awe to have this opportunity to present on this astonishing character in our time. So firstly, on Sir Arthur Lewis, he was born in St. Lucia, 1950. Lewis completed his secondary education at age 14. At age 18, he enrolled at the London School of Economics, LSE, to obtain a Bachelor of Commerce degree. An outstanding scholar, Lewis was appointed assistant lecturer during his tenure at LSE. The first Black appointment made by the prestigious institution. He lectured the first year course on economic analysis. So firstly, let's first establish who is Arthur Lewis. We are so proud to be presenting to you about this astonishing man. Arthur Lewis made an incredible contribution to the development of our Caribbean. And he is a role model to look up to, as he is revolutionary, as he creates and he does not conform to society norms. For instance, he doesn't, in his degree, he didn't go the normal route of either law or doctor. He decided to be an economist, right? And that is important to note. So what is development planning in our own definition? Development can be defined as the process by which a country uses its resources to grow its economy, improve quality of life of its citizens, and conserve and preserve its environment, according to Nadia Johnson et al. So what development planning to Sir Arthur Lewis contains? He spoke about it being a way forward to come from traditional colonization to one of industrial modernization in the Caribbean to support and improve the standard of living for the Caribbean economy. So first we'll have our first point, point one. done by Maya Tony.
Good morning. So, economic development with unlimited labor supplies, 1951. In Lewis's model, he stated in a labor surplus economies, poverty and low wages persist once the opportunity cost of labor remains low. This simply means that once the cost to employ a unit of labor remains low and doesn't compromise profits, the capitalist system remains unchanged/unburdened. He also stated the reasoning behind this is simply due to a large reserve army/labor force, which results in a disequilibrium, which means supply is way larger than the demand. As such, in today's society, but specifically Trinidad and Tobago, with the formation of trade unions, they have fought for the installation of minimum wage legislations. With this installation of this law in economics, this results in a price floor. A price floor can be defined as the lowest legal price a commodity can be sold at. Price floors are used by the government to prevent prices from being too low, for example, the minimum wage legislation. So as we can see from the graph, the equilibrium price would have been at $6, and approximately 400 to 500 persons were willing to supply their labor. However, as the government implemented a price floor at $7.15, you realize more persons were willing to supply their labor, which resulted in 50 more persons coming into the labor force, and also it resulted in unemployment because there was more supply for labor and there was less demand, because this capitalist doesn't really want to pay more for labor when they could just stay at the minimum amount and don't decrease their profit maximizations. Criticisms. It is evident that the installation of minimum wage legislations was a smart idea on behalf of the government to curb poverty and the existence of low wages. However, imposing a price floor on the capitalists can result in higher unemployment rates due to a rise in opportunity cost to employ a unit of labor. As such, higher unemployment rates increases poverty. This is quite evident when analyzing the recent unemployment statistics of Trinidad and Tobago, which we will see on the next slide. So as we can see, it started in the year 2016 when unemployment was 3.21%, and then it went to 2017 where it increased by 0.09%, and in 2018 it increased by 0.10%, and it kept on going until 2020 where we saw a drastic change with unemployment being 6.74% in that year. And as such, one can see unemployment rates have consistently been on the rise in Trinidad and Tobago for the last 5 years. One may choose to say this is a result of the crash of the oil and gas industry, or even because of the global pandemic. But this unemployment rate had also decreased the country's gross domestic product from 27.27 in 2013 to 21.53 in 2020. A decrease in GDP evidently shows that the country's growth and production has decreased over time, thus equating to less revenue being generated. And as such, unemployment will continue to rise, since if the country is making less money, they won't employ as much persons to supply labor. So a conclusion of point one, as such, we can see that Lewis's statement that labor surplus economies usually are characterized by poverty and low wages once the opportunity cost of labor remains low due to a large reserve army and labor force is factual, but the developmental process also played a part in increasing unemployment due to the installation of minimum wage legislations. So I'll hand you over to AJ to present point two.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My presentation this morning is going to speak about Sir Otto Lewis's thesis on industrialization by invitation. Now, first of all, we have to define what industrialization is. This is the process by which an economy is transformed from a primarily agricultural one to one based on the manufacturing of goods. From a historical perspective, we have always been an agricultural region, from the production of tobacco to sugar. During the enslavement period, we have always been involved in agriculture. And so Sir Arthur Lewis was trying to modernize the society by moving away from this agriculture, because there were problems with agriculture, as we know, soil exhaustion and these types of things. And there wasn't enough labor willing to work in the agricultural sector. So he wanted now to modernize the economy by bringing industrialization. Now, he stated that the Caribbean region had an unlimited supply of labor. This labor could be absorbed by inviting multinational companies to establish themselves in the territories and use the surplus labor in their industries. When we have a surplus amount of labor, we have unemployment and we have low wages. And that doesn't fare well in the development process. So what Sir Arthur Lewis was trying to do is to increase the standard of living by inviting multinational companies to come and industrialize the regions, the territories in the region. So by the absorption of the surplus labor, employment rates would increase, along with the standard of living in the territories. Now, there are 4 components of Sir Arthur Lewis's theory. The compounding of these factors are the coefficient of the theory of industrialization by invitation. So we have 4 components of this theory: local labor, foreign investors, operation plans, and governmental investments. Now, we already said that the local labor was there. We had a high rate of unemployment, and so what governments should do, according to Arthur Lewis, is to invite foreign investors, such as multinational companies, to come and set up shop in their country. Now, to set up shop in the country, one must first have the capital, the operational plans, and they must provide the utilities for that multinational company to come. And therefore, the government must be willing to invest funds into such a project. Now, we have some regional examples of the application of Sir Lewis's theory. We know that in Puerto Rico, we have Operation Bootstrap. In Barbados, we have Operation Beehive. Here in Trinidad and Tobago, well, mostly in Trinidad, we have the oil and gas sector that is still running the country. And for example, we have bauxite mining in Jamaica. Now, most of these operations are still ongoing because countries are still relying on these multinational companies to kind of absorb the surplus labor. And we know that in Trinidad and Tobago, we rely heavily on the oil and gas sector to bring in our revenue. But there are some drawbacks of Sir Lewis's theory. And we know that some territories didn't even have requisite funds to give multinational companies an invitation to industrialize. And that is because the metropole, or what we would call Britain, they didn't want development in our countries. So they made it a little hard for us to seek to get the requisite funds in order to start this invitation to industrialize. Also, multinational companies continue to take advantage of lesser developed countries by employing persons from overseas to fill administrative and executive positions, in addition to the non-payment of taxes and huge remittances returned to the home country instead of investment into the country of operation. Also today, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we are seeing that the countries of origin, America and those European countries, since they are having a hard time, we will have a hard time because these multinational companies come from those more developed countries. So in conclusion, invitation to industrialization, it was a good effort by Sir Otto Lewis, and we continue to benefit from his work even in today's economy and society. Thank you.
Point three. Point three talks about trade liberalization. Historically, development post-World War II for Caribbean has been small compared to core countries such as the United States. A pioneer that stood for such change was Sir Otto Lewis, who argued for the production of manufactured goods for domestic, regional, and metropolitan markets. The conceptualization of trade liberation was realized as it will foster the free movement of trading between Caribbean countries that are part of the CARICOM. Financial power was stressed consistently by Sir Otto Lewis as he understood the importance of industrialization as it poses significant advantages to the Caribbean. Trade liberalization just embodies the independence of the Caribbean, independence of the Caribbean's economy to stand on its own, to be somewhat semi-peripheral, meaning that they are somewhat developing in the economy, developing in the resources, developing in how their citizens are getting knowledge. For instance, colleges coming to the Caribbean, right, to kind of immerse the knowledge to the citizens. Also, liberalization of women. According to Cook 2002, one of the main roles of education has been to maintain gender inequality. Historically, within schools, girls are socialized to accept subordinate roles and patriarchal ideologies. The socialization of gender roles in the subjects being taught to girls that are to play as the caregiver role, while boys are to play the breadwinner role. Sir Otto Lewis appreciates education as the way to true development of the region. Therefore, women and men being permitted to equal educational opportunities will enhance the development. Today, boys and girls have equal access to the same subjects. Many girls are now the STEM of these institutions, right? So Sir Otto Lewis, he subscribed to the view that women are supposed to be liberated from the home, the confinement of patriarchal ideologies of just being the caregiver, just being minority in society. He applied this view because it adds an extra level of labor force for the Caribbean to further enhance it by getting double labor force. In conclusion, Sir Otto Lewis has made tremendous input to the development of the Caribbean by enlightening persons through his extensive studies on improving the economy. Additionally, lowering unemployment and eradicating poverty was of paramount importance of Sir William Otto Lewis. And I now leave you a quote by Sir Otto Lewis as it embodies his perception of development. When the developed grow fast, the developing grow fast. And when the developed slow down, the developing slow down. That is the end of our presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Bishop's High School in Tobago. Excellent presentation on development planning, certainly bringing out some of the key thematic focal points of Sir Otto Lewis's scholarship, and doing so with rich economic theory, and also creating that link to development planning, albeit with a critical lens. And I do appreciate, and we do appreciate, the critical lens that was brought to bear upon your presentation. So wonderful work from the three schools we have heard from so far. And we move swiftly on to Holy Faith Convent Penal. I hope Holy Faith Convent is here. If they are here, someone can immediately announce its presence. Yes, Holy Faith Convent is here. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. And we will move swiftly now to Holy Faith Convent Penal, which is going to present to us another presentation treating with development planning. So Holy Faith Convent, the floor is yours. Please begin. Okay, apparently Holy Faith Convent is not here, so we can move straight on to the Serata Lewis College, St. Lucia, and we specifically welcome Team St. Lucia to be part of this very special webinar. The Serata Lewis Community College in St. Lucia is going to be presenting on industrialization in the Caribbean. And I now invite Team St. Lucia from the Serata Lewis Community College to deliver its presentation. Team St. Lucia, Team Serata Lewis Community College, the floor is yours.
Good morning. My name is Jelani Justin.
My name is Kiana Justin.
I will be with Otto and Estelle, and we're going to be presenting on the progress of Caribbean economies through industrialization.
Here is what we're going to be reading to. Who is Serata Lewis? What is industrialization? The story behind it, the techniques, the relevance, and a peek of the reflection.
Who is Serata Lewis? Serata Lewis was an economist famous for his work in developmental economics. His best-known work is the dual sector model of developmental economics, which is also known as the Lewis model. Lewis spent his professional life trying to improve the lot of former colonies as they struggled into independence and viability. He was a towering influence on his generation. His model was created with the aim to maintain the economy, as overpopulation became a problem and consequently, wages, production, and prices were low.
One of Serata's most famous quotes was, "Education is the great growth industry of the third world." It means that the third world countries can improve their condition only by providing proper education for the masses. Education is the first step towards a better and developed nation.
Serata's path-breaking work on the transfer of labor from a traditional to a model capitalist sector in conditions of unlimited supplies of labor is one which is still prominent today in the Caribbean. It involved the introduction of industrialization.
Industrialization in the Caribbean. Economic history of several developed or advanced countries indicates that industrial development, namely the expansion of manufacturing activities, has been an important element in the achievement of a higher standard of living. Several less developed countries have sought to emulate the experience of these developed countries by fostering the development of manufacturing operations. Governments have provided the necessary infrastructure, roads, water, electrical systems, ports, etc., and the policy framework to expand industrial operations, which would widen the range of available goods and services and provide foreign exchange earnings and employment opportunities.
The crux of the argument against industrial development in the region was that Caribbean countries would lack the raw materials, such as coal, iron, etc., the capital and the industrial skills to undertake full-fledged industrial activity in the Caribbean.
The need for rapid industrialization in the West Indies rested chiefly on overpopulation or populations too great to be maintained solely by the agricultural sector. Therefore, the solution of creating new opportunities for employment of the land came about.
Lewis proposed a dual track approach, a small but expanding industrial sector paying modest wages and a large agricultural sector paying subsistence wages. By keeping wages constant, the industrial sector would grow, surpluses would be reinvested, and excess labor would be soaked up from the agricultural sector. Slowly living and economic standards would rise, and both employment and food needs of growing populations.
The census was then used to determine who had a job and who did not find a job. Finally, the desirable situation was made possible. More productive employment for some persons crowded into unproductive jobs was sorted out. They were confined to domestic service.
The agricultural and the industrialization resolutions thus reinforce each other, and neither can go far unless the other is occurring at the same time. They were forced to trade food for manufactures. If a country is rich in natural resources relative to its population, it can hope to be self-sufficient. But if it is poor in natural resources, it can only get all the food and raw materials it needs by exporting its labor in the form of manufactures. The West Indies is poor in natural resources. They have a few minerals of economic significance, little land relative to population, and too much of their land is in the form of mountains and scrub.
Relevance. In the mid-1950s, William Arthur Lewis outlined a model which had the dynamics of labor reallocation in a dual economy, composed of a traditional and subsistence sector and a modern or industrial or capital sector. Since the population was too great to be maintained solely by the agricultural sector, the introduced mechanization system made new opportunities for employment, and the dual economy became an inevitable answer to economic growth in those years.
However, despite its age, the model remains as significant as it was before. It is an ideal type device for the study of economic development to reach contemporary patterns of structural transformation and their implications for inclusive growth, wages, profits, employment, and productivity can be examined.
Here is a peek of our reflection. Lewis envisaged industrialization as a process requiring the simultaneous development of agriculture and industry. Industry would absorb the sulfur labor emanating from agriculture, allowing the sector to increase its productivity and standard of living.
Countries still invite investment by wooing, then by giving them subsidies and more. For example, St. Lucia's Prime Minister or ministers still invite investors to our country to give them knowledge of marketing. To further regional integration, our country went from Organization of Caribbean Community and Common Market, also known as CARICOM, to Caribbean Single Market and Economy, which is now CSME. To date, the population has been increased and the poverty rate has fallen by 47 million since 1990. As a result, some countries still use the model to improve the economy, while some others do not see fit to use it for economic development. Thank you. Thank you for listening to our presentation. We hope that it was very informative and to hear about one of our pioneering Caribbean economists who had an instrumental role in developing the Caribbean and our common market.
Thank you very much, Team St. Lucia, Team Serata Lewis Community College. Again, a very inspiring presentation and much in the vein of the presentation that preceded it from Bishop's High School in Tobago, bringing out some of the key thematic focal points in the scholarly works of Serata Lewis, and again, tying it into issues of development planning and other realms of multi-sectoral, interdisciplinary perspectives that draw on the scholarship of Serata Lewis. Again, we did enjoy your presentation and it was very informative. So we have had a very good batting lineup so far, much in the vein of the glory days of West Indies cricket. Desmond Haynes, Gordon Greenidge, Viv Richards, and of course, Lawrence Rowe. So we continue and let's see. We now move on to Presentation College Chaguanas in Trinidad, and their presentation will address industrialization and unlimited supplies of labor. In the interest of time, again, we will try to keep the presentations within 10 minutes max. And again, presentation, if you are here, you can begin your presentation first by announcing your team and who will be presenting. So the floor is now yours, Presentation College Chaguanas.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, we thank you for the opportunity to present today. My classmates of Presentation College Chaguanas will be introducing to you the Nobel Prize winner, Serata Lewis, and his theory as it relates to his model of industrialization with unlimited supplies of labor under a microeconomic perspective. My colleagues Keegan Jagrup Singh, Mikhail Taylor, and myself, Ronaldo Ghani, will present this to you. Firstly, we have this illustration showing that Google recognized on December 10th, 2020, the professor, Serata Lewis, and his achievements and the unlimited supply of labor theory that is approaching 70 years. From 1954, and in 2024 would make it 70 years. This is the basis of his model, economic development with unlimited supplies of labor, the Lewis two-sector model. Assumptions are a traditional subsistence sector has surplus labor, which basically means the labor that is being supplied in the traditional sector, agricultural sector at the time, is in surplus because the laborers may be unskilled. So we have high levels of supply and a constant demand for labor. The second assumption is traditional sectors pays the average product, income sharing by families. Since we know there's a surplus of labor, the workers are getting paid an average wage based on production per day, and this may be a minimum wage. The third assumption is due to rural surplus labor, the capitalists can hire unlimited amounts of labor at a wage equal to the subsistence wage. The capitalist we speak about here refers to profit-seeking individuals. So all this assumption is saying is if we have surplus labor in the traditional sector, this can lead to high levels of unemployment. The capitalists would pay the same wages as the traditional sector would pay because of the unemployment caused by the surplus in labor. And also, the capitalists would want to maximize their profits. Therefore, the same wage would be suitable, but the workers benefit of a job and not being left unemployed. Now we look at the two-sector model. The surplus labor from the subsistence sector would transfer, as you can see the arrow going to the right, to the industrial sector, which is the capitalist sector. Therefore, the modern sector could provide jobs for these surplus laborers. This is why it's called a two-sector model, where the surplus labor could be absorbed from the modern sector, economic dualism. The theory suggests that the modern sector should be invested in highly, and if we don't have enough investments locally, we invite foreign multinationals to make foreign direct investments, offering them tax breaks and subsidies in return to convince them. This will then develop the industrial sector. Serata Lewis recommended trying local investments first, like creating factories and other progressive businesses within the modern sector. Now we move on to the microeconomics behind it. So, the diagram on the left represents the subsistence sector, where the wage is determined by the interaction between the demand for labor and the supply of labor, where they meet at equilibrium, which shows the employment level E1. The low wage is constant, therefore the wage rate is equal to the marginal cost, which is seen on the right diagram representing the modern sector. The horizontal blue line is the supply of labor, and it's perfectly elastic because of the constant wage rate. So the same wage rate in the subsistence sector is the wage rate in the industrial sector. The demand for labor is equal to the supply of labor at low wages. E1 would be the amount that would be employed. Employment will increase as the industrial sector expands, and more investments and capital accumulation is made by government and private sector companies. My colleague Keegan will speak more about capital accumulation. When there is more expansion in that sector, the demand for labor increases. Therefore, more job opportunities are there on the market, and now we have E2. And it will continue this trend and absorb the surplus labor until there is no more surplus labor. So the advantage from this theory would be low-cost surplus labor that can be shifted from the subsistence sector to the industrial sector, when more investments are made by government, private sector, and foreign multinationals, and this will in turn allow the demand for labor to increase until the surplus of labor in the subsistence sector is no more.
Moving on, the model based on industrialization and unlimited supply of labor, there are three testable assumptions, and we can ask these questions and determine to what extent they are applicable to today. Wages, is it kept at a constant level? Technical knowledge, is it always good for the economy? And savings, is it major and necessary to growth determinants? Firstly, are wages kept steadily low? The critique. Earnings in the subsistence level set as the same wages in the capitalist sector, but in practice wages tend to be higher than this. In the same paper, also reiterated the point that his model does not require a zero marginal product of labor. It simply needs the supply of labor to the capitalist sector to be more or less perfectly elastic. When the surplus is exhausted, wages begin to rise above the subsistence level. Moving on, technical knowledge. Is it always good for the economy? Y being income is equal to technical knowledge, functional, physical capital accumulation, human capital, and labor. When technical knowledge increases, it has a positive effect on physical capital accumulation, human capital, and labor, and therefore increase in overall input. The importance of savings to expand to industrialization and development. Need to increase saving and investing from 4 or 5% of national income or less to about 12 or 15 of national income or more. This is the central problem because the central fact of economic development is rapid capital accumulation. And the reason why savings are low in an undeveloped economy relatively to national income is not that people are poor, but that capitalist profits, although relatively to national income. As the capitalist sector expands, profits grow relatively and increase proportion to national income reinvested.
Next, I will be discussing the relevance of the unlimited supply of labor model in today's economy, Japanese 2015. It was Lewis's paper, Economic Development with Unlimited Supplies of Labor from 1954, as well as his subsequent book on the theory of economic growth from 1955 that constituted the founding documents of the modern concept of economic development. In them, it was argued that the main strategy for economic development was industrialization, and that economic growth allowed for the solution of diverse political and social problems. According to world-famous economist Paul Krugman, the paper is the most famous in all development of economics. This implies that Serata Lewis was not only famous in the Caribbean, but also it was a prominent figure worldwide. In fact, it provided the first clear-cut theory of economic development. Unlimited supply of labor suggested that a seeming disadvantage of less developed societies, the presence of a large number of unskilled workers in the agricultural sector could become an advantage if this very same unskilled, largely redundant agrarian workforce were put to work in an expanding industrial sector. Paul Krugman dealt on the issue of why certain economic ideas come to be accepted while others do not. He wrote, "To be taken seriously, an idea has to be something that you can model." And this is exactly what Lewis's concept of dualism and unlimited supplies of labor provided. The basic idea of dualism continues to influence many in the development and growth of literature today. A few researchers use the term explicitly. Many more use two-sector models in which the sectoral dichotomies are characterized by new terminology to fit today's reality. Examples of these terms may include formal and informal, modern and traditional, and lastly, industrial and agricultural. The argument is offered that China is reaching its lowest turning point, presumably leading to a period of rising wages, declining comparative advantage in manufactures, and declining returns to investment. For example, Zhang Yang and Wang 2010, Wang Weaver 2013, Das and NDI 2013. Asian tigers. These economies include Hong Kong, South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore. They refer to economies that underwent a rapid industrialization in the early 1960s and 1990s and continue to uphold this rapid development. These economies were able to grow by pulling in large supplies of labor costs, primarily drawing workers from rural areas from the urban informal sector. With this, I would like to end our presentation, and thank you all for attentively listening to us.
Thank you very much, Presentation College Chaguanas, for that very insightful presentation. Again, a presentation that was rich in economic theory and demonstrated the interdisciplinary links and the critical thinking that ought to be brought to bear upon any reading of the work of Serata Lewis. Indeed, reading Serata Lewis has often been a challenge to many, including senior academics. And I am convinced, based on your display today, that it has been a task for you, but a task that was really rewarding, and you have demonstrated in so many ways your grasp of the essential features of the literature associated with the scholarly works of Serata Lewis. So Presentation College Chaguanas, many thanks for yet another great presentation coming from all of the schools that have presented so far. We now move on to the last of the schools and school teams that will present today. And that school will be Saraswati Girls Hindu College that hails from Karani in Trinidad. So I would like to ask Saraswati Girls Hindu College and the team to commence their presentation. And of course, the speaker will announce the team as well as the presenters who will be making the presentation on behalf of the team. Saraswati Girls Hindu College, the floor is yours.
Good morning. My name is Priyanka Ramprasad, and I represent Saraswati Girls Hindu College. My team consists of Fisha Dilraj, Celine Supasad, and myself. A little on the history of Sir Otto Lewis. In 1954, Sir Otto Lewis wrote a pioneering article entitled Economic Development with Unlimited Supplies of Labor, which was published in an economics journal, the Manchester School. This model gained popularity as the dual economy model, or the Lewis model. The model was written based on classical views, as he felt other views did not adequately shed light on problems hindering the development of labor surplus economies. The main assumption underlying the model is that the existence of two economic sectors, each with the following features. Sector 1, the traditional sector. The traditional sector is labor intensive with limited or no use of capital. In this sector, workers are paid a wage based on output per worker. Low levels of productivity. This means low wages were paid to workers. Surplus of labor exists, such that each additional worker employed will add nothing to total output, meaning marginal product is zero. Therefore, a movement of workers out from this sector will leave total output in the sector unchanged. Sector 2, the modern sector. The modern sector is capable of absorbing surplus labor from the traditional sector. It offers at least a 30% higher wage rate than the traditional sector, which was fixed. Greater use of capital, which increased labor productivity and the marginal product of each worker employed. In this sector, more profits were made, a proportion of which was saved and reinvested, thus increasing the capital stock. The workings of the Lewis model of dual economy. Surplus workers move from the traditional sector to the modern sector due to higher wages. In the modern sector, workers become more productive due to greater access to capital and output, and profits rise. This means that more is saved and reinvested. Growth strategy. How can both sectors coexist and benefit each other? Linkages between sectors. If the modern sector, example food processing, requires raw materials from the traditional sector, example agriculture, growth in the modern sector should encourage growth in the traditional sector. Pool of skilled resources, pool of skilled workers. As the modern sector expands and attracts workers from agriculture, it would create a pool of skilled persons who are not prevented from transferring their modern techniques and knowledge to the agricultural sector, allowing it to also grow and develop. Redistribution of tax revenue. Lewis suggested that the increase in tax revenues from a growing modern sector can be redistributed to provide assistance, example subsidy to persons in the traditional sector. Evidence of workers moving from the traditional sector agriculture in Trinidad and Tobago. As you can see, there was a decline in agricultural labor force between the periods of 1980 to 2004. There was also a decline in rural population between the periods of 1980 to 2004. Challenges. Challenges occurred due to the movement of economic labor. Wages may rise in the modern sector. This means that the gap between the high income earners in the modern sector and low income earners in the traditional sector results in inequalities. Secondly, profits may also be reinvested. This is because several other factors can reduce savings and hence investment. Example, high-priced capital goods and pessimistic business expectations. Foreign-owned businesses might repatriate profits abroad. Mismatch of skills. It is not always easy for workers in the traditional sector to move to the modern sector because they may not possess the education and technical skills required. And lastly, output in the traditional sector may fall. If land becomes more arable due to fertilizers, better climate, etc., each extra worker might be able to add more and more output to total product, meaning marginal product is not zero. Solutions to the dual economy model. Wage disparity. Progressive taxes in the modern sector use revenue earned to assist the low-income traditional sector. Example, subsidies. Low investment, industrialization by invitation strategies, put forward by Sir Arthur Lewis to encourage foreign investment. Structural unemployment. Retraining of workers who transfer from the traditional sector so that they will be able to contribute towards the modern sector. And lastly, decline in agriculture. Linkages between the traditional sector and the modern sector. Example, for raw materials used in the food processing industry, greater use of technology, export assistance, and other incentives. As I conclude this presentation, I'd like to thank you all on behalf of Saraswati Girls Hindu College for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you very much, Saraswati Girls Hindu College, for a very insightful presentation. From my judgment, it was skillfully displayed and disseminated, and I identify wholeheartedly with the solutions that you proffered toward the end. So at this point, I can say that we have heard from the school teams, and I am sure that so far the virtual audience is well pleased with the presentations that have been presented thus far and can signal such pleasure by giving a virtual round of applause to all of the schools that have presented this morning. Wonderful presentations, and I can see that the minds of our young people are well polished and poised to illuminate scholarship and practice as we move into the 2020s, 2030s, 2040s, and 2050s, more than 100 years after the writings of Sir Arthur Lewis emerged. So at this point, I want to move swiftly on to the second component of our day's proceedings that deal with the comments of the commentators who we invited to be part of today's proceedings. They include, in the order of their presentations, Dr. Amanda Thomas, a sociologist, research methodologist, Dr. Vanas James, an outstanding economist in the region, Dr. Nicole Smith, an economist associated with Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. in the United States, and Dr. Tahimba Salandi, a sociologist who works here in Trinidad and Tobago. So just to say a few things about the first commentator, Dr. Amanda Thomas. She is a research methodologist who graduated from the University of Denver with her PhD in research methods and statistics. She is the recipient of several institutional research awards for her publications, presentations, and collaborative research projects. Her interests include transformatory transformatory educational praxis, and theoretical and applied qualitative, quantitative, and mixed and evaluation research methods. I now invite Dr. Thomas to begin her commentary. Dr. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. It really is inspirational to be here and to witness the next generation of scholars give their contributions, not only on the original articulation of Sir Arthur Lewis's work, but also how these original articulations align with contemporary issues. So without further ado, my contribution to this webinar, I'm not intending to critique, defend, elaborate, or refine on Sir Arthur Lewis's work or the content that was presented. Because this webinar is focused on centering youth or Generation Z, as that's your psychometric profile. I focus on the man and looking at the personal and contextual formative elements that made him who he was. And one of the things they talk about your generation, Gen Z, is you like to center yourselves in most of the things that you participate in, like what's the so what? How does this relate to me and my future? So in revisiting some of Sir William Arthur Lewis's work, there are three themes that came out for me. So the first theme, which would be relevant to you all, or everyone. One, self-determination and identity development, the importance of self-determination and identity development. Two, sources of inspiration. And three, defiance and innovation, that there's a linkage between some measure of defiance against convention and innovation. So the first one, self-determination and identity development, has to do with the freedom to know who you are and how you see yourself. Now, that is something that transcends time and space. I know we are all connected to institutions and families and communities, but at the end of it all, self-determination has to do with knowing who you are and being able to order your life, your aspirations, the things that are important to you based on knowing who you are and how you see yourself. So I want to ask this should be interactive. I want to ask you something. So what are some of the expectations which has been imposed on you as youth within your school settings, within your families, etc., that absolutely has nothing to do with how you see yourself? So let me give you an example. Every time my body enters a space, I am being evaluated on my sex, I am female. 2, my age, I'm relatively young. 3, my race, I identify as Black Caribbean or African Caribbean, and I am dark-skinned, and there's that colorism element. And based on these elements, persons tend to judge me and expect that I will live up to their expectations. Imagine Sir William Arthur Lewis heading into these spaces, Princeton and London School of Economics, with a background like his, coming from very humble beginnings, from the third world or developing world, having an accent. And the fact that he was able to transcend some of the expectations that was, I'm sure, imposed on him is what enabled him to be the innovator that he is today. Would anyone want to share like some of the expectations that are imposed on you, on your body, who you are when you enter spaces, and how that probably affects your self-determination or self-determination process? Anyone? Anyone? All right, cool. So what is your frame of reference which allows you to overcome negative stimuli? And I, looking and using my creative imagination and reading between the lines, especially Gervin's work was very helpful in looking at Arthur Lewis as a man before his time. I am sure that having a strong sense of self-determination and identity development allowed him to overcome the negative stimuli that was directed at him to become who he was. And the second point, sources of inspiration. Yes, I can. Yes, we can. He was a man of firsts. So first president of the CDB, first university president or vice chancellor, first Black man to win the Nobel Prize in economics. But when you read his scholarship and read between the lines, his sources of inspiration came from many things. His parents, illness, Marcus Garvey, connecting, I think, at 7 years old, going to a public meeting, walking through the streets of Bangkok, looking at the plights of Caribbean people or the weights of history imposed on Caribbean people as articulated by one of my mentors, the late or deceased Dr. Dennis Brown. So one of the things, I gave a guest lecture at Tennessee State University very recently, and Black Panther is something that, it was a very inspirational movie. And I remember when in another forum, I gave a lecture and I walked in at the University of Denver for face-to-face interaction, and someone, the way I was dressed unconventionally, and someone said, "Wakanda forever," based on the way that I was dressed. And then that led to a discussion of how that movie was so inspirational because it was so unconventional, and it made them believe, give them a different frame of reference to believe in different ways of doing and knowing and being. And that is what Sir Arthur Lewis and his work, that body of work, represents for me. And I hope it represents for everyone today. It's a source of inspiration that you can always meet and exceed the expectations that is being imposed on you. And then the final one is defiance and innovation. The quote that a couple of presenters used, where he stood against conventional ideas. And I think that quote continues that when you go against conventional ideas or couch unconventional ideas, you usually stand alone or with a minority. So one of the purpose that was very explicit in most of his work and his life is to defy abstract heterodoxy. So as he said, and I will quote, concerned with elaborating theory and turning words into diagrams and diagrams into equations. All right, so that's the end of my presentation, and I hope it will be really useful to motivate the youth present in this forum.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Amanda Thomas, for your intervention and your inspirational words. And we move straight into the next presenter. But before I introduce him formally in the virtual medium, I want to say a few things about him. He is Dr. Vaness James, and he is a former senior policy advisor, UNDP, and World Intellectual Property Organization international consultant. He has served as senior research fellow in the Scotia Bank Chair of Entrepreneurship and Development and adjunct distinguished professor of econometrics at the University of Technology in Jamaica. Dr. James is the author of 3 WIPO reports measuring the contribution of copyright-based industries in Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, the OECS, as well as author of the UN ECLAC manual on the design and conduct of public expenditure reviews in Caribbean countries. Dr. James is an outstanding economist within the Caribbean with regional and international experience. And I wish at this point to introduce everyone to Dr. James. So Dr. James, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Godfrey. And let me begin by commending the teams that you assembled from the high schools here this morning. I was particularly impressed by the idea that this topic is not a part of the normal curriculum that they are taught in school. And yet they found a way to do such wonderful research and bring forward pretty accurate ideas about what Lewis was really saying and recommending to Caribbean people and to so-called developing countries as a whole. I think the best way I could serve your teams today is to put forward a few ideas that would help them see a little bit more in what Lewis was articulating and advocating. The first thing I would want to draw their attention to is that his basic idea was that you do social science, as in observing the reality around you and modeling that reality. So you do not say write economics as if you lived in London when you, or in New York when you are really studying Trinidad and Tobago or Jamaica or St. Lucia. You need to look at the facts of that case. And the critical set of facts that he observed really were that we had quite a lot of significant problems in the sociology, problems in the economy stemming primarily from a shortage of capital. All of the underemployment in agriculture and in the petty trades and so on came from the fact that these people were working with an inadequate amount of capital. And so the basic logic of his position was that if you want to fix that problem, you have to accumulate capital. And then two kinds of questions arose. First, where do you get the capital from? And how do you sustain the effort? And secondly, what do you use the capital to produce? Now, on the first question, the where you get the capital from, he made a very important point that tends to miss the scholars in the Caribbean region and in the world. And that point was that, and this is brought out clearly in the unlimited supplies paper, if you're short of capital, you have two choices. Either you produce some of it or all of it, or you import it. And he made the important point that you're better off producing the capital that you need if you can. That's an important answer, and I'll come back to that point in a couple of minutes' time. But suffice it to say that if you're going to try to produce the capital on an economic basis, you're going to need to be able to export some of it, primarily because to do it economically in a small space like those we have in the Caribbean, small scale production would not generally do much for you in terms of raising your standard of living and so on. And Lewis understood that. But the other part of it is to what do you use the capital you produce to do? And the answer to that came from his theory of trade and theory of the movement of capital itself. The theory of trade was the idea in the second part of the unlimited supplies paper is pretty clearly laid out, that led him to the idea that our comparative advantage was not in agriculture. Agriculture is a very expensive thing to do because of low marginal productivity in agriculture, alongside high marginal productivity of labor in industrial activity, in manufacturing. So he said, you know, your comparative advantage measured in marginal productivity terms, your comparative advantage is in manufacturing. And then he said, well, look, if you're going to get into manufacturing and you do not have experience and skills in the area, well, what do you expect to happen? If you apply his argument and generate a high marginal product of labor in manufacturing, it would create a high profit rate in the production of manufacturers. That was his logic. And that high profit rate would normally be higher than the profit rate investors would earn in so-called developed countries in the North Atlantic, in Britain and the US and so on. So those investors would want to move their capital to come to the Caribbean and produce the manufactured goods so that they could earn a higher rate of profit. And that was the logic of getting people to come. It wasn't so much the incentives that governments could put up and so on. It was really the higher profit rate that they could earn by investing in manufactured activities in the Caribbean. Now, the facts of our history has proven that our labor supplies are so small that we can't competitively produce and export the manufactured goods. And as a consequence, pretty much everywhere in the Caribbean, manufactured activity has declined to almost zero. We can't compete with Mexico, China, Southeast Asia, which have large supplies of underemployed labor that could be used to keep the wage rate modest and low, and allow the profit rate to remain sustainably high, so they could attract high inflows of foreign capital. And if you look at what is happening in China, they are one of those countries that attract enormous amounts of foreign capital, notwithstanding the ideological conflict in the world system around it. The final thing I would want to draw to the attention of the young people concerns this business of the production of capital. Lewis's point about the need for us to produce our own capital is reinforced by an examination of the modern data. When you look across the global economy, what you will observe is that the countries that are doing best are not the countries that simply produce a high share of manufacturing in their GDP, but it's really the countries that produce a high share of capital in their GDP, where capital means physical assets, physical capital, goods, and so on, as well as education and healthcare and so on. So you have to ask, well, what can we produce? And the answer to that, of course, is we may not be able to produce the manufactured goods, but we surely can compete producing education and healthcare and creative industrial output and housing stock and that kind of stuff. And that means we have a real chance to develop, even if we can't develop by producing the manufactured goods that Lewis recommended. And the final thought is that Lewis also, as all of these young people have observed in many ways, Lewis also understood that what you have to do if you're going to upgrade your industrial activity in that way is that you must also upgrade your institutions, meaning your governance model, your education system, and all of that, banking arrangements and so on. And you must upgrade as well your capacity to innovate. You must deliberately focus on all three of those. And when we look at the modern data, what we find is that it is indeed true to say that the countries that are at the top of the chain are the ones that simultaneously and in an integrated web focus heavily on capital production, on institutional quality, and on an enormous capacity to innovate, as we are now seeing with the ability to innovate and produce vaccines that all of us in the rest of the world would rely on. All those come from the North Atlantic and from a place like Cuba that has tried to apply this kind of model that I'm talking about here. So I thought I would add these thoughts to the young people's wonderful efforts to distill the synthesis that lies in the whole body of work that Lewis has done, and hope that it would add an insight to your understanding of what Lewis contributed in his enormous body of work. So thanks a lot, Godfrey.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vanus James, for your thoughtful presentation. You raised a number of critical issues that integrated many of the thoughts expressed by the young people in their presentations this morning. And knowing you as a Lewis scholar, the Lewis scholar that you are, I am sure there are valuable lessons to be taken away, not only by the young people, but also by others in the virtual audience who might be hearing a bit more about Lewis, Serata Lewis, and his legacy for the first time. I now want to move on to the next commentator, Dr. Nicole Smith, who is the chief economist at the Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce in Washington, D.C. She leads the center's econometric and methodological work, and she has published broadly on issues akin to the center's research agenda. Of course, that agenda being in the area of workforce issues and education. Dr. Smith was born in Trinidad and Tobago and graduated with honors in economics and mathematics from the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus. She was the recipient of the Serata Lewis Memorial Prize for Outstanding Research at the master's level at the University of the West Indies and is co-recipient of the 2007 Arrow Prize for Junior Economists for Educational Mobility Research. She received her PhD in economics from American University in Washington, D.C. Having introduced Dr. Smith, I will now like to invite Dr. Smith to share her comments with us. Dr. Smith, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's always a difficult task to speak after Dr. Thomas or Dr. James, just given exactly what they've said before and how succinct they were in summarizing some of the work of Dr. Lewis. It's a little bit difficult, but nevertheless, I can begin to explain how happy I am to be a member of this conversation. Thank you so much to Dr. St. Bernard and SALISES for this invitation. I'm happy to be here. In full disclosure, I'm a labor economist with a specialization in education. And the pathway to this selection was a meandering one. I sometimes refer to myself as a recovering macroeconomist because I started off at the University of the West Indies doing macro things, having been introduced and steeped to the underpinnings of it by Dr. James himself. I don't know if he remembers this, but I was one of his students way back in the day, and by Dr. St. Bernard as well in another lifetime. So thank you for introducing me to economics and for giving me this desire to continue to work in this field. And I'm really happy to be a member of this conversation. I want to speak directly to the students that presented today. I was so impressed by the work that I saw. I was so impressed by, your ability to take the information presented before you, to synthesize it in the types of questions that were raised and to present it to us in conversation, really demonstrating that you have absorbed so much of the work that Serata Lewis has given to this world. And I think, if I think of Serata Lewis as a development economist, the thing that comes to mind is development economics is life. For me, it is life. And what I mean by that is irrespective of what aspect of the discipline you find yourself concerned with, the social and material well-being of society is always a concern, right? You always want to make sure that people are doing better and better also. Development economics in particular focuses on the economics of country development and how people in a society can figure out how to escape poverty and enjoy a better standard of living. So it's virtually impossible to begin to think of development and development economics anywhere without being exposed to the invaluable writings and publications of Serata Lewis. And I think one of the students before talked about Paul Krugman and another Nobel Prize winner and the extent to which he was also influenced by the work of Serata Lewis. I think I heard from the students, they talk about Serata Lewis as the first of many. In some ways, he's still the only. As far as I know, he's still the only man of African descent, of Black descent, who has won any type of Nobel Prize in any science. I mean, when it comes to Nobel Peace Prize or literature, there's still, you know, people of color who have been exposed to those. But Sir Arthur Lewis in 1979 still remains the first and only in many cases. He was an intellectual, a pioneer, an innovator, the first and only of many, worthy of all of the accolades and more that we are currently lauding on him today, right? But in thinking of what I would say, I think I wanted all of us to transform ourselves back to, if we could, back to the future, back to the 1930s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, when Sir Arthur Lewis was around, existing, writing, publishing, and forging a name for himself in this world. He migrated to the UK and was making himself in a world that was in turmoil. And I want you to think of that word turmoil, right? While the world was coming out of the Great Depression, preparing to grapple with a war with Nazi Germany, while, you know, civil rights was still a dream, okay? And in the United States, the color bar and segregation was still law. So this is the type of world he was in. And when I hear some of the students talk about facing racism, I just don't even think you begin to understand the type of discrimination that he felt, much more than we today. When he paved that way, there's nothing that we could say today could give us an equivalent of what he would have faced. So when he went to the London School of Economics, you can think of it as this oasis in the desert of discrimination. And even so, there will still be many caveats that would still limit him in what he was doing, but he had to overcome that. And in trying to formulate what I would say today, I actually listened to a number of conversations with some of his past students and who were nicknaming him a rebel. So past students from Princeton, people who were exposed to him, and they call him a rebel. So here we are talking about the pioneer and the academic and all of these wonderful things to say about Sir Arthur Lewis, and we have some of his students calling him a rebel. Can you begin to imagine how hard it was to think outside of the box in that environment? Economics at the time was only a discipline for whites. And not only was it a discipline for whites, it was a discipline for white men. Okay, so most of the conversations were about the advancement of white society and with limited supplies of labor as the essential control. So this is everything he's been told. This is how you think of the world. The world is white. This is how you think of the world. And here's a man having to push against that tsunami in order to develop a name for himself and to try to figure out how he can make a contribution to the places that matter to him. I'm assuming that everyone on this, in this conversation right now has read and absorbed the economic development with unlimited supplies of labor. So I won't try to summarize that. And Dr. James even, expanded on how we should have thought about that. But here's what I would say. Even today in our world is in turmoil. So I wanted you to think of the world in turmoil when Sir Arthur Lewis was around, and I want you to think of the world in turmoil now, right? So we have COVID, we have states of emergency, we have depressed labor markets. Some of the students talked about crime. They spoke about limitations of diversification. We're still in turmoil. So how can we now begin to think outside of the box, right? In the same way that he was able to do that. How can we begin to think of improving society and our material conditions, even in the face of all of these changes and challenges? And I don't want to tell you this, in terms of lip service, because most of us have heard all of this before. But I want you to roll it around in your mind, and I want you to also think of your inner rebel. Okay, so as much as you're an intellectual, as much as you're spending your time thinking about this and doing your work and moving forward and writing your exams, think about your inner rebel, because that's what gets you forward. The internet is a wave of opportunity. There are no limits to the acquisition of knowledge. And I heard some students today talk about rote learning, right? And they spoke about how irrelevant it is in society and how irrelevant some of the things that they've been learning and being taught. Get outside of that box. There's no need. You can learn anything you want. You can be exposed to anything you want. There's some of these institutions have their entire curriculum online. You can go download it. So there are no limits anymore. You don't have to depend on rote learning to advance your own knowledge to move forward. We really do need as a nation to find additional ways of temporarily supporting entrepreneurship and innovation. And my emphasis is on temporary because far too often we take that temporary help and we think of it as permanent help, and we never get outside of that cycle of dependency. So find ways of doing that. Emphasize workforce development training, business practices, customize entrepreneurial needs. We need to think about better involvement of the private sector in the delivery of these programs. And I always talk about that because me personally, I'm appalled at the extent to which our private sector in Trinidad is not involved in the investing of human capital. We often see investment in human capital as solely the responsibility of the public sector, when we can have public sector, private sector partnerships in trying to figure out how best to develop our human capital to move forward. And in the conversation about agriculture, it still needs some sort of PR program, right? People think of agriculture, they think of hard work, dirt, and they don't think of hydroponics, organic, sustainability, genetic manipulation. There's still opportunities in agriculture that we can think about and supporting development in the way that Serata Lewis had mentioned in his writing so many years ago. And finally, since this entire meeting is in his honor, and it was through a prize that I won in his name that allowed me to actually even, go to school and do my PhD, I want to end this discussion with a quote from Serata Lewis that some of you already spoke about, but I'm going to say it again. Collective judgment of new ideas is so often wrong that it is arguable that progress depends on individuals being free to back their own judgment despite collective disapproval. Again, progress depends on individuals being free to back their own judgment against collective disapproval. Because sometimes you have to go against the grain to advance your knowledge. Find your inner rebel, be a rebel. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Smith, for your very passionate engagement in treating with the issue of the life and the scholarly work of Serata Lewis, and again, being an advocate for advancing, that the value of such an enterprise among the next generation based on what you presented here today. I want to move swiftly on to our final commentator, Dr. Tahimba Salandi, who is a sociologist whose specialty areas include sustainable development, education, globalization, and social inequalities. He is a director at the Institute of Indigenous Knowledge, Empowerment, and Research, which has ongoing projects toward encouraging ecological livelihoods, dialogue, and social justice. The Institute manages a community-based ecological farm and a nature park as part of its mission to set an example of an alternative and decolonial model of development. Having said that, it's clear that Dr. Salandi is well equipped to comment on the issue of the life and work of Serata Lewis, insofar as he has lectured in SALISES and other departments of the university on issues akin to development theory. So I now invite Dr. Salandi to issue his comments. Dr. Salandi, the floor is yours.
Good morning, all. And I want to start by commending Dr. St. Bernard and the entire SALISES team for this very important event that seeks to engage the young people in a type of way. I also want to congratulate the young people for your research, your effort, and all of that showed very clearly in your presentations. And it's certainly a pleasure of mine to be involved in these proceedings. I would also have to commend the Institute for including me, certainly as a sociologist who has been quite critical of some of the ideas and work of Sir Arthur Lewis. I was quite moved by the effort and the detail that went into the presentations. They were coherent, they were clear, they were polished, and they demonstrated a critical thought and engagement with the wide body of work that constitutes the life and times of Sir Arthur Lewis. A couple of early critiques as I share some of my thoughts on the overall topic. I would have liked to see a stronger representation of the sources that you all would have read, both in the course of your presentation and as well at the end. So as an academic, I have a general interest in knowing what was read and how that was taken and used in a certain way. And of course, some schools did this better than other schools. I would have also liked to see a stronger engagement with the body of work that has critiqued the work of Sir Arthur Lewis. And we all should be aware that the work of Sir Arthur Lewis has garnered mixed reviews. There are different views and contestations. These critiques in terms of the presentations was perhaps best embodied by Bishop's High School that had quite a strong critique of some of the ideas and work of Sir Arthur Lewis. But overall, I want you all to congratulate yourselves for this very important participation in terms of one of the key thinkers who has shaped Caribbean thought in a certain type of way. So we have persons such as John Laguerre, who refers to Sir Arthur Lewis as the region's most renowned intellectual, while Terence Farrell refers to Lewis as the Caribbean's first indigenous economist. Yet there are very mixed and contested ideas about the relevance and place of the work of Sir Arthur Lewis. We have a range of schools, buildings, departments, libraries, awards named after Sir Arthur Lewis. Yet at the same time, his work was critiqued widely and deeply, and he was described by some of the radical economists as being a Black Englishman, and his work was said to have encouraged the recolonization of the Caribbean. The same way in which we have a number of things named after Sir Arthur Lewis, I actually have a good friend who was born in the 50s and 60s, and his parents were very much influenced by Sir Arthur Lewis. And so they named him Arthur Lewis, given that their family name was Lewis. And when he got older and he learned who he was named after, and he learned more about Sir Arthur Lewis, he was so horrified that he was named after Sir Arthur Lewis that he changed his name. So my point is that we have very mixed views across the region as to the life and times of Sir Arthur Lewis. Personally, one of my admirations of the work of Sir Arthur Lewis has to do with his challenge of the classical idea of comparative advantage. The idea that certain countries, namely colonial countries, should specialize in manufactured goods, and the rest of the so-called third world should only specialize in what is called primary goods, namely agricultural products. And Sir Arthur Lewis would have challenged that idea by championing the right of the Caribbean to industrialize if it so chose. I'm also a fan of early Sir Arthur Lewis when he was a young man, when he wrote to the Moyne Commission, challenging the inequalities and white supremacies within the colonial project. and making a case strongly for certain changes and transformation related to industrialization, which she saw as being a central part of bringing the Caribbean out of a state of poverty. Yet, Serata Lewis said clearly that the colonies are poor because colonial people have not learned how to master their environment. And so as a student, I would have started to look at Serata Lewis. And while I had a few points of agreement, especially in his early work, I found myself disagreeing strongly with some of the general reasons upon which he would have built his entire body of work. And that comes across in that quote I just gave about the very reasons for the underdevelopment of the Caribbean. And so it is my view that the problems of development are not just about a lack of capital, but more so about knowledge. Who determines what is developed and who is developed and who is developing, who is third world and who is first world? As a Caribbean person, I wholeheartedly reject the characterization of namely or mostly certain Western countries as being the epitomes of development, and mostly global South countries being called development or third world. Those types of descriptions have really been a case of those who have had a certain power in the global world system, having the ability to determine for others who is developed and who is not developed, as well as the pathway of development that we all should subscribe to. We as Caribbean people are in a curious place. We have had a whole set of historical circumstances that has led us to certain ideas about development, where how we see ourselves, what we value as progress and success and education and beauty, all of the concepts, academic and non-academic, how we see ourselves and how we see other people in the world, have not come organically as people have evolved and tried to work out better concepts, but they have come largely from processes of conquest and domination, where we have inherited a wide range of ideas about the world that continually to define how we see development, how we see ourselves, and the pathways we see as being very relevant. And one of the key challenges in all of this is how do we learn from all of the strengths and weaknesses of all our thinkers, not just the academic ones, and to understand how they have contributed, and also to really think about and reflect on their weaknesses. So as Norman Gervan would have said quite pointedly in his article, Serata Lewis was a man of his time. And it's important that we understand the historical pressures and the weights of an entire colonial project that he would have had to carry. And he would have tried in various ways to resist and challenge this, which came across quite strongly in his early years. And in other ways, especially in his later years, he would have been affected by this. He would have been traumatized. He would have carried the pain of trying to have certain aspirations of being an engineer, etc., and not really being allowed to. And in other ways, he would have accommodated various parts of the colonial project. And thus, we here in 2022 have to work out on our own terms. Who are our heroes and what aspects of our heroes are we choosing to elevate? The parts of Arthur Lewis I admire. I do not admire him because he was awarded the Nobel Prize, and I do not admire him because he was awarded a knighthood. These awards do not define me. I do not acknowledge them. I do not see them as being able to tell us as Caribbean people who our heroes should be. And I'm quite wary of how Western and global interests have a tendency to reward certain of our Caribbean people who they are more comfortable with, while applying a range of pressures against other persons who they are less comfortable with and whose ideas they see as less being aligned with their global agendas. So all in all, the work and life and times of Sir Arthur Lewis has so many lessons for us as Caribbean people, not only in terms of how we are navigating our ongoing pandemic, but how do we confront age-old issues of neoliberalism and capitalism and external interventions into the sovereign affairs of the Caribbean that pull us away from being able to see ourselves through our own eyes. And that ongoing quest for self-determination and to have development on our own terms is one of the ongoing lessons of the life and times of Sir Arthur Lewis. So I want to close by again commending the students, and I urge you all to go forward bravely as you continue your quest to understand and engage yourselves as Caribbean people. Because to be a Caribbean person is to have a certain experience of the world, and the outcome of that shouldn't just be about becoming famous or becoming known on a global stage, but about putting forward a different view of civilization, a different view of economics and academics, and ones that really align with a certain sensitivity from a region in which we have a deeper experience of the outcome of what happens when there's a deep inhumanity to other human beings, and how easy it is for certain projects of greed to get wrapped up in the cloak of civilization and progress and development. So again, I thank you all, and I will end there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salandi, for your commentary. And I think what clearly comes out of your commentary was the fact that as scholars, the hallmark of our lives as scholars is the notion of academic freedom. And clearly it was evident in your remarks, and it is important that, those standards prevail even as we speak as academics and share our thoughts and our positions with the next generation. And clearly, I think, your presentation does bring to life, when juxtaposed with everything else that has been said, that there is this notion of academic freedom that drives our enterprise, and that is what makes it so interesting. And when we think philosophically about truth, truth is really a contestation about what is false, what is true, and to what extent the evidence we can bring is such that the evidence will allow us to reject, false claims because they do support, in fact, what appears to be true at a particular point in time, but at another point in time could actually be found to be false, given the scientific revolutions and what characterizes scientific revolutions. So having said that, I want to move on because we are close to the end. I want to now invite Dr. Priya Mohan, who is a senior research fellow in Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies here on the St. Augustine campus. I want to invite Dr. Mohan to bring a vote of thanks before I say a few concluding remarks. Dr. Mohan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. St. Bernard. Good morning, everyone. I feel relieved that after all of these excellent presentations, that my job this morning is really the simple but important one, to give thanks and to give the vote of thanks in making this event possible. So of course, I would like to begin by thanking the students, their teachers, principals, and all others who would have supported them in their presentations. The presentations showed that the students were able to read, fully understand, and also apply all of the teachings and work of Sir Arthur Lewis. And I think it's fitting for this event to really, it has broad justice. It's celebrating the life and work of Sir Arthur Lewis. So congratulations on your presentations, and I wish you all the best in your future studies. I would also like to thank Dr. Vanish James, Dr. Tahimba Salandi, Dr. Nicole Smith, and Dr. Amanda Thomas for their interventions. Those interventions would have pushed the conversation forward, and I would like to thank you for that. I'd also like to thank our Dean, Dr. Akola Lewis Cameron, for bringing opening remarks, as well as Professor Audrey Henry Lee, our University Director at SALISES, for her opening remarks. Also to our SALISES administrative staff, Ms. Sharon Hodge, for all of your work in putting this forum together. Also our UA marketing and communications team, Josanne, who is always here with us, always here to support us. Thank you so much, Josanne. And of course, I'd like to thank our acting director, Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard, for his vision and leadership in bringing this program together, and of course, his excellent chairing of this session today. And last but not least, I would like to thank our loyal participants for your continued presence and support of our events. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing all of you at our next event. With that said, I'd like to close by leaving a quote by Sir Arthur Lewis. Education is the great growth industry of the third world. So thank you again, everyone, and I hand you over back to Dr. St. Bernard.
Thank you, Dr. Mohan, for your vote of thanks. And I think in the interest of time, you have already given thanks to all of the key participants and those who have made today's proceedings possible and as successful as it has turned out to be. But again, I think, I too want to especially thank all of the schools and students of those schools, together with the teachers who mentored them and prepared them to deliver their presentations today, the school principals who permitted us to have their schools participating in this event, and certainly the support from the various administrative bodies, including the Ministry of Education. Thanks to all of you. This was not pitted as a competition. It was more a collaboration, and a collaboration where all of the schools were placed on even keel, so to speak. And as a result, SALISES plans to issue a plaque of appreciation to each of the 6 schools that participated today in today's event. Plus, we will also issue a certificate of participation to all of the students and teachers who were responsible for all of these remarkable presentations that we witnessed today. I think coming out of today's proceedings, when we think in terms of the CAPE syllabus, particularly in areas such as economics, sociology, geography, and other subjects akin to development studies, there is a focus to a large extent on some of the North Atlantic classical thinkers and philosophers. I mean, there's this great reverence for Marx and Malthus and John Maynard Keynes and so on. And I'm not saying that these persons and their thought processes are not relevant and so on, and informing many of the things we do today, albeit with that critical lens as advocated in the presentation by Dr. Salandi. But I think, as a Caribbean person, and given the depth and the breadth of his scholarly works and legacy, that the Serata Lewis Institute has an obligation to perhaps work with the CXC to see to what extent Serata Lewis's work scholarship can be entertained as part of the CAPE syllabus. So I think it is a matter that we here in the university need to discuss and see to what extent this can actually happen. So having said that, I think, we were really well fed. We had a great feast today, and I want to thank all who witnessed it and took time off of their busy schedules to join us in the virtual space and listened and participated in today's events. I think it was a success from my assessment of it, and I hope that my colleagues would think the same way about the proceedings and how they developed and how it was carried on. So generally speaking, my sincerest thanks on behalf of SALISES and the University of the West Indies to everyone. I particularly want to thank the Dean of Social Sciences and the University Director of SALISES Regional for their support and participation in today's event. The principal of the St. Augustine campus was informed of it, but unfortunately he was engaged in other university meetings. And we at SALISES, we continue to strive to bring to the various publics the importance of our work and our thought processes in development studies to all and sundry. And this is just one of a number of different media we use to do such. So on Monday next, we are having a sustainable developments webinar, which is going to feature presentations from all of the SALISES fellows across the 3 campuses, more or less showcasing the ideas and findings coming out of their research, and all of you are welcome to be part of those proceedings. I particularly want to continuously thank my staff here in SALISES St. Augustine for their unwavering support with regard to all of the works we do. And for this event in particular, I want to extend sincerest thanks to Mr. Ephraim Thompson and Ms. Sharon Hodge-Bigat for the support each one of those 2 officers would have rendered to today's proceedings. Of course, indirectly, all other staff members have been supporting behind the scenes. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for attending. Do have a wonderful rest of the day and weekend, and continue to be safe as we engage and interact with the COVID-19 virus and its various variants. So thank you very much all. Have a good day.